Today we're here to talk about the power of storytelling, and everybody that is here with me today is in one way or another a storyteller, and also in one way or another has a strong and powerful connection to Disney. Geoffroy de la Bourdonnais is the president of Chloe, where he is tasked with converting high fashion stories into a bustling business. He also happens to have spent a significant part of his career as a senior executive at Disney. Susanna Lau is one of the industry's pioneering fashion bloggers, defining the medium from the very start, and the founder of the renowned fashion blog Style Bubble, which celebrates its 10th year anniversary this year. She also, as I learned this morning, is one of the biggest Disney fans on the planet. So she is the perfect person to have us talk about Disney and storytelling today. Sebastian Maines is the buying and merchandising director of Selfridges, where he has spent 13 years. He connects fashion stories directly with consumers in one of the world's most exciting retail environments, and has collaborated with Disney in the past, most recently on a Star Wars collaboration. And Sandra Choi is the creative director of Jimmy Choo, where for more than 20 years she has been creating some of the industry's most desirable shoes and accessories, and recently created a sellout version of Cinderella slippers for Jimmy Choo. So I'd like you to welcome all of our guests here today. So a few months ago, I was having tea with Geoffroy in Paris during Fashion Week, and we were having one of our on and off catch-ups. And somehow Geoffroy mentioned to me that he was taking his senior executive team to California to visit Disney. And I said, that's really interesting. We just got an email from Disney, and they're really interested in doing something with us. And I said, Geoffroy, what does Disney have to do with fashion? And he said to me, Imran, it's all about telling stories. And that's really what sparked the idea for the conversation we're going to have today. And I thought, given your history with Disney, Geoffroy, perhaps we could start with you, and you could talk a little bit about Disney before we get specifically into fashion, and the power of Disney as a business, as a storytelling machine, and as a cast of characters.
Okay, it's going to be difficult for me to speak about Disney with all the Disney executives in front of me. So I have to watch my words. All I can say is I was really lucky, because when I was approached by Disney, at the time I was in the beverage industry, my kids were exactly in the target. They were between 2 and 12. Perfect target. So when I announced to them that I was moving from PepsiCo to Disney, it was an explosion of joy, and you cannot imagine. So it's just the power of Disney, whatever the age, particularly when you are a young kid. What we all share here is that we've all been kids, and we've all known the power of attracting the emotions through strong storytelling, and that's what makes Disney so unique. What I learned at Disney is the power of narratives and the power of basically creating a world, a theme, and a bunch of characters to draw the emotions which are common to all people around the world. I mean, there's not a single country which is not sensitive to Disney stories, because they all play on the fundamental human emotions, and particularly the emotion that kids respond well to. And as we all know, we learn a lot through stories. Kids learn through stories. So if you can actually touch the emotions of your audience in whatever business you are first, then you can then, in the second stage, touch the rational. And I remember one of the things which I'm just going random now, but one of the things which I found fascinating at Disney is that we didn't start any meeting without starting with a beautiful 3 minutes Disney movie. Just to make people feel the audience and to rekindle memories of childhood, and to rekindle or to reawaken the child in everybody. And once you are in that mood, then you can be sold anything. And that's why you've seen so many products with the Disney fantastic characters, and that's why everybody's immersed. So I'm not going to speak forever, but I hope.
So it's interesting, right? Because as you speak about creating a mood, creating emotion, evoking something in people, even if they're young people, or in some cases much older people, it seems. What is it that you see as the similarities between how the fashion business works and how Disney works? Because you are in the unique position of having worked at Disney, but also working at Chloe. And what are the kind of parallels that you can draw?
Well, it's funny because when I went straight from Disney to Christian Lacroix, which at the time was probably the best in couture. And you can argue whether couture is fashion or not, but that's another debate. But he was really the master of couture, and I still believe he's one of the best. And I said at the time it's very similar concept, business model, because at Disney, you create with a movie, everything starts with the story of the movie, where you have the world, the theme, the characters, and you create characters. And then all the business units of Disney, the parks, the consumer products, the music, etc., they basically play with these characters, Mickey, Donald, and everybody, and Pocahontas, whoever, and transform that into a story, either 3D in the parks or 2D on the products, or musicals, 3D music, etc., So everything starts with the story of the movie. In the fashion industry, it starts with the fashion week, the fashion show. So if your show is strong in storytelling, then you can really then tell the stories in different manners, through different collections, etc., So to me, it's quite similar in that respect.
Okay. We have people who have, what's interesting is we have really interesting cross-section of the fashion industry here, right? So we have the perspective of a designer, the perspective of a retailer, the perspective of a writer and consumer. Maybe we could talk to each one of you a little bit to understand kind of your perspectives on this idea of storytelling. The theme of today really is the power of storytelling. So Sandra, as the creator of some of the most beautiful, memorable shoes and accessories, how does narrative play a role in the way that you think about your collections?
To start a collection, every time, I do this 4 times a year, and on the top of that, I've got a team to run. For me, everything needs to start with a story. The story will give me the framework as well as the beginning, the content, and the end result. So it guides me through something that it needs to be deliverable as well. As a designer, I need to switch off from everything that is asked of me so that I can go and dream, and to bring that dream alive, and to bring everyone else from the designer to the makers to the window dressers with me. So to tell that story is the key, because otherwise, as a creative, I move from A to B, get influenced by something else that I see. I need to actually give that framework to make sure that the story itself remains as it is from start to finish. Of course, things can change, but it's bringing something that is alive and in a fantasy world, build the character, for me to actually come up with a storyline that I can actually play out, whether it's through the dressing of the shop or my own collection or the volume of the different type of product that I'm making is key.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us an example, of a story that you've told, or that a narrative that is particularly memorable that you think was resonant with consumers?
Personally, for my pre-summer collection, it was about a siren who was going through somewhere that nobody can imagine, and all I know is she likes to collect items and things that's really precious to her. So, and to me, there's a benchmark on, because it's a December delivery, so I need to do a Winterland. So I have 2 sides to this story, where I have a siren where she's beautiful, she's carefree, she's someone that's nomadic and she travels. Mm-hmm. So I make up this story in my head whereby she goes through this heated desert and the sun and the weather changes, and then she go into this nightfall where everything is become wintry and icy and she needs her snow boots. Mm-hmm. So I made up this moonlight and sunlight story, and that was me playing a story that I created. Mm-hmm. And in terms of getting references, yes, you can have fantasy, but at the same time, sometimes we all can relate back to something that's very simple. Mm-hmm. When I was asked to take part in the Cinderella project, that was like, okay, Cinderella's shoes. And these shoes need to relate to today. What do I need to do? Swarovski was really amazing. They opened a cupboard for us. I just went and dreamed. I picked up the biggest crystal that I can find and played it. And I knew that I wanted magic to happen on the shoes. And I also know that these shoes need to be relatable to women on its own. So all those different parts come alive. And as far as I'm concerned, Cinderella and her shoes needs to kind of becomes the most magical thing. So, and that play of the influence of what that story is about to the items that I was designing, it came alive.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian, so you then are the next step in the puzzle, which is, someone like Sandra or many other designers, they come up with a narrative, and then it's your job to kind of make that narrative come alive in a retail setting, right? And it's about translating the story or the characters and bringing them to life. So from a retailer's perspective, how does the power of storytelling influence the way you connect with the consumer?
Well, at Selfridges, the storytelling is super important. Our value is at Selfridges is surprise, amaze, and amuse. So by definition, it's a storytelling. And I guess what we get from Harry Gordon and Selfridge, from when he opened the store in 1909, it's all about creating new stories. And when he opened that store, the first thing he did is to create browsing, but also the windows were completely storytelling in the sense that at that stage, it was all about piling product in the windows. There was no real story. And I don't know if you saw the TV series Mr. Selfridge on ITV, but there is that French guy who does the window. So the first window that Selfridges created, it was actually inspired from a French painter. So he had a background of that amazing painting with a little product into it. So suddenly, it was a sense of theater. And I guess the reason I'm taking that as a reference is we're just trying to do the same today. So I guess we're fortunate. We have, at Selfridges, we have a lot of opportunities. But it's about taking the right one and sometimes, and effectively, when Disney came to propose to give us the Star Wars collaboration that we did recently. I mean, that's, for us it was a proud moment because it's about thinking how we can do something different which can amaze, surprise and amuse our customers.
And what's the reaction? So like you do something like the Star Wars thing, which currently in the last year or so, in the last 6 months or so, has been really in the air, right? Because the movie came out and how do people respond to something like that? Give us a sense of the reaction when you do something like that.
Well, it's obviously a different step, a little bit like you described. So we start to have a meeting with the team. And then as we're digesting, the objective of both companies, we just try to push the boundaries and make it exciting. And working with different designers, how we can, have new products, effectively the display on the shop floor, creating events. I think we did the Jedi Academy for kids, so I think it was every weekend. Saturday was a series of, it was a nightmare because there were so many bookings. But on Saturday and Sunday, you see 2 Jedi walking on the floor and a bunch of kids waiting to do a fight. So, this is, it starts from the office and just trying to have that fun. Thinking how we can entertain our customers because it's just putting product on the shop floor is not good enough anymore. And it's how you do that. And obviously now it translates also digitally. So how you have to, how do you do that? Through social media or doing movies, etc. So at the end of the day, it's about having fun. And then if you have fun, then obviously you can very easily communicate that to the customer. It has to feel fun and real.
Right, and I think that's a really important part, right? Because there's a difference between slapping a character or a logo on a product, and it feeling real. And maybe that's a good segue to you, Susie, because you all get to see everything, right? Everything out there comes to you. So how do you distinguish between something that feels like authentic and real in terms of a story and something that just feels like a crass collaboration?
Well, I mean, there's a sort of fine balance, in the kind of act of collaboration, whether the one collaborator, in this case Disney, is in sync with the other collaborator, and you can see that in the final product. Did the designer or whoever the partner in question, did they get all the nuances of the instigator, in this case being Disney? Did they see all the different layers? Did that result in the final product? And there is a distinction, I think, between those kind of lazy collaborations where the logo or the image has just been plonked on, and to something a bit more of an evolved product.
Yeah. We were just looking upstairs at this incredible desk that Zaha Hadid created.
That's definitely an evolved product.
Right, so it's the example. I think the other really interesting thing is if you take world-class designers and you give them this world to play in, these iconic stories, these iconic characters, and you literally just give them free rein, then you can come up with something you may never have expected.
Right, and I feel like in the last 10 years, we've had such a breadth of kind of cross-field collaborations, and particularly with fashion, with the art, design, film, music world kind of coming into it. You kind of, I feel like that sort of breadth of product has become a lot more vast and a lot more rich and a lot more just a lot more exciting, I couldn't think of any of these kind of collaborations happening, before.
And what is it about the Disney characters that are so resonant for you? Why, when I think you said you were gushing earlier.
I was gushing upstairs.
What is it about, apart from, say, nostalgia, what is it that makes these characters so appealing on a universal basis, do you think?
But nostalgia is a sort of important facet, because there's comfort, there's security in having these recognizable characters, and they exist within your childhood, but then you kind of take that forward, and you'll always remember those kind of early poignant memories of certain films, certain characters, and that will never go away. So I think there's nothing wrong with nostalgia, especially when they're kind of respun and reinterpreted later on, and that's kind of where the kind of collaborative efforts come into it.
Mm-hmm. Sandra, do you have any thoughts on that about, when you were asked to do the Cinderella project? I'm sure you get asked to do lots of projects, right? So what was it about Cinderella, or that kind of Disney? What is it about these Disney characters that make them so appealing? Because it's kind of incredible. If we were walking through the exhibition earlier, and I don't think, and I get to see quite a bit too. I had no idea about the breadth and depth of product collaborations between fashion and Disney. So what is it about Disney?
I think a lot of it is to do with very much personal experience, personal engagement with how did you drawn to a certain character. I've got 2 young children myself, and one of them is a tomboy and the other one is a girly girl, and I have breakfast with one of them dressed up with princess and sunglasses and handbags every morning.
I wonder where she got that from.
Yet to see. I just think that it's so easy to understand, because when you don't need to explain to anybody. When you attach something like a Disney story to it, most of us probably know the stories, the modern one. If you have young children, you'll get to know it. Or sometimes it's that simplicity. And I love it because ultimately I was telling you the story about the story that I made up for my pre-summer collection, and I had to explain it quite detailedly. But whereas when you attach something that is already imaginable, you've already known it, you experienced it, they're remaking it, the story is already there. And to bring up, it's also a challenge too for a designer to do certain collaborations, because sometimes you can't do such obvious turnout on a design, because then you're not doing your job properly. So the collaboration has to feel right. And for Cinderella to do something with Jimmy Choo, it's got a pair of shoes involved. I'm just waiting for maybe the red shoes to show up now for Dorothy.
Yeah.
So, you know, it needs to connect. And like Susie was saying, that there needs to have some kind of synergy.
Geoffroy, we've talked a lot about the inspirational part, but as it pertains to actually the business of fashion, or the business of these kinds of collaborations, from what you observed upstairs, I mean, what were your observations? What did you think?
Well, to me, it was not so much of a surprise, because I was in that universe personally,
Right.
Except for the one that you mentioned, Zaha Hadid, which I think was absolutely amazing and totally unexpected for me. It's true that you asked why are the Disney characters so powerful in terms of collaborative power with other brands. I think there's an element of innocence in most characters, and also fantasy, the ability to actually push the boundaries of imagination, so you can really stretch your imagination, outside the real world and dream. And what you said as well about the connection when you were a kid, about the emotion that you had when you saw certain movies, Bambi, I mean, of course, comes very often to mind. You cannot be untouched. I mean, it's so powerful.
Yeah. Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that we're bombarded with so many images and so much in the digital era? I mean, Sebastian, you mentioned that too. There's something that just cuts through all of that noise. Susie?
Yeah, I would say like with Disney in particular, because of the instant recognizability, it's one of those things that you can just, like, when you're flicking through your Instagram and the image comes up, you immediately recognize it and you immediately respond to it. It's why when designers kind of who am I thinking of? Like Bobby Adley, I think he did a sweater with Ursula on it. And I think that was my best performing picture of that LCM, edition of LCM, just because it was like, oh, Ursula, oh, like, love, It's that sort of instantaneous reaction because of the recognizability and and obviously the fondness attached to the characters, that it's not that you just recognize them, it's also that it's part of your culture, your personal experience with it.
Obviously, we can't always rely on iconic characters to get clicks and likes and whatever. So, let's talk about storytelling in the digital era, because I think it's changed things. There's certain things that probably have stayed the same, but as a designer or a retailer or as an executive in the industry, telling stories now means the stories you're telling aren't just competing with a few other things. You're competing with everything. Mm-hmm. So how is it that you stand out, Sebastian, in the digital era in telling stories? What can you do to kind of bring the power of that storytelling in a digital sense?
I guess what we're trying to do is to keep the same voice in store and digitally. So whatever we're going to create in store, whether it's a collaboration with Disney or something completely different, you just need to make sure there are some clear synergy. So you can't have one message and completely different in store. But at the end of the day, it's the strength of the story and how you can portray it differently. I think, just to go back to Disney, I think the stories by itself, they evolve so much, and I think most of the time we assume that this is for kids, but there's so much connection and it's so much more fun than it's ever been. So I guess even as an adult, you can easily connect now, which is probably not necessarily the case in the past. So I think because all that evolve and it's how the energy you put into it. But yeah, at Suffrages we do a lot of films, and we tend to collaborate, and that's the recipe we find, which is very effective for the time being. But that thing, the digital world evolves constantly, so we'll see what we're going to do next.
Yeah, Susie, what is it that stands out in your world, in the digital world?
I think, I don't know, it's a sort of tired old cliche, but, obviously content is king. And I think now more than ever, whether, you're talking about products, new collections, I think for an audience to like truly engage with content, not just like sort of scrolling through it rapidly and like fast reading things, it really has to be about a well-crafted story with a lot of context, a lot of good narrative, a lot of...
Do you have an example for us about something it doesn't have to be Disney related, like a story that's really resonated online?
Well, okay, maybe like from a brand perspective, what they're creating, for instance, I don't know, like Gucci and their campaign films, for instance, visually, narrative-wise, it's all, for me, like a sort of total package, and you're kind of drawn into it, and you're understanding what they're trying to say and what they're trying to say to like from a consumer's perspective. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's a good example from a brand perspective. But then, like, in terms of like media content, like I love, for instance, like an in-depth story on the New Yorker, where you get like 20,000 words to like really craft out a story. And I think we need to be wary, like especially in as we move in the as we talk about like digital content, how content needs to adapt for the digital world, that we need to be careful that storytelling within writing doesn't disappear entirely. Mm-hmm. And I think that's even more important within fashion, because we lose so much of like context, background, research, and all of that I think is even more important, especially when you've got so much product being bombarded at you, Yeah.
It feels to me like the stories that fashion has been used to telling for so many years have been
trend-driven.
Either trend-driven or just the end product.
Yeah.
So it would be, everything but the process of getting there. And I think actually our industry has so much ability to tell really powerful stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to say what I keep saying to my team, is that if you look at the advertising world, which is known for creating huge stories, very impactful stories, there's always a copywriting element and an art direction element. There's always this duality of copywriting, concept writing. In the fashion world, I have to say that it's like 99% art direction and very rarely storytelling. The copywriting, and that's why the campaigns, I mean, I take responsibility for our campaign as well, are usually about which director or which photographer or which cast, which models and which venue.
And it's often the same ones.
And it's the same ones.
Yeah.
So the story is actually quite poor.
Yeah.
And basically everything is left to the product to tell the story. That should be more balanced. And I've seen the impact of the strong story. I'm sorry to talk about Chloe for 1 second, but in the last collection, which was the winter show of Claire, well, she basically was inspired by a woman in the 70s in France who traveled to Pakistan, Afghanistan, in the Orient on a bike, alone, which was quite daring at the time, maybe actually less daring than today, but anyway, quite daring. And her encounter and the discovery that she went through resonated so strongly with the press and with the audience that the collection itself was not particularly stronger than the previous ones, but the story made it more impactful. So I believe that if you have the right story, and if it's in sync with the values of the brand, it cannot be taken from an outside world, then you can really amplify your own collection, as you mentioned.
I mean, one of the best examples of it, of course, of great storytelling is Karl Lagerfeld at Chanel, right? So,
Absolutely.
you know, those spectacular shows that he does in the Grand Palais, you know, in conversations with Chanel over the years, what I've really understood is that raw material that is created from that moment, it inspires the storytelling across every medium on every part of, you know, whether that be digital or the windows or the ad campaigns. And if you get that core story right, and if there's depth to it and there's originality to it and there's authenticity to it, then yes, somehow that translates with the consumer at the end of the day, which seems, you know, quite consistent with what you see at Disney.
It's an added value.
Yeah. It's not alone enough. Obviously, the products have to be strong and the products have to be of a certain quality. But it certainly elevates things to a certain level. And it seems to me that the industry can take, you know, more opportunity to tell these amazing stories because we have so many excellent stories to tell, but somehow...
I was going to say, but it's why the role of the creative directors like shifted so much in the last decade, that they become not just designers, they're also, you know, they're also telling stories and building universes, building worlds around the product. I think that is become actually incredibly important. You know, it's not enough actually just to have a good product. I don't know. Would you agree?
Yeah, Sebastian, you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's, I personally feel we're entering in a moment where it's more about product and less about a brand. You know, for such a long time, it was the brand first, and then, you know, you buy into the brand, and then eventually you drill down to product. And I think, I mean, for our point of view, it's so exciting that you can find, you know, new brands, new products that is, and it's actually selling, resonating. And even if it is designer no one have ever heard, it is so exciting. And because they bringing something different, whatever sustainability or a new story basically, which I think is great.
On the digital angle again, as people are bombarded with so many things nowadays, what other things do you think it takes? So we've talked about strong characters, we've talked about strong narratives, we've talked about good products. What other things do you think are important? You were telling me earlier that the Cinderella shoe, you weren't even expecting to sell it, and then it sold thousands of pairs. Right?
I was allowed to dream.
Yeah.
I was allowed to dream. It wasn't something that we wanted to do the project because one is to do with the stories to do with shoes, and all the other designers also taking part, which was great. And the other thing was it was just taking a break. It's part of being escapism, really. Taking a break from all the collections that I was working on. Just go away and go and imagine and go and dream. And I was able to, and I had the freedom to actually step up and think, what do I imagine this shoe to be? So the whole aspect of, in terms of digital that you're talking about, I always think that if you show someone a great picture, it's more powerful than words. And you just capture your attention and you remember it. Whether it's the colors, whether it's the way that the picture is made, whether it's the story that the picture actually been kind of put together. So in terms of storytelling, the picture itself can make the story. And digitally speaking, you put a picture out there, people react to it. You don't have to read it people don't have time today. Mm-hmm. So the convenience of making that picture and making something that is visible, mm-hmm. I think that is a shortcut.
What about reacting to something that happens spontaneously? I think the first time you and I met, we talked about a story of something. Do you want to share that story? Because I think sometimes also it feels like things in fashion are so manufactured these days.
It was very spontaneous. Basically, it was to do with my project with Rafael Montesso. He's an artist who's based out in Brazil. I woke up in the morning and my friends were telling me about Jimmy Choo. I'm like, yes, Jimmy Choo what? Jimmy Choo the dog. So Raphael is an artist who lost everything through his relationship, and he ended up with his dog that's called Jimmy Choo, and he did art with him. And I thought, if anybody want to be happy, they just need to see his art, because his art made me happy. That morning was like, ding. He's talented. It's very simple. He uses his dog to actually do these marker pen description of a drawing on white walls, and I wanted to collaborate with him. I wanted to bring Jimmy Choo's together, and
Jimmy Choo the dog and Jimmy Choo the company.
Yes, and that was it. It was a simple idea, but I had the power to actually bring the two stories together, and that was like, he lives in Brazil. I would have never found him. It wasn't for digital.
Which is what I think is another great thing about digital, is that actually designers can draw inspiration from it and connect with other creative people who can spark a story like that. I mean, this past season, Alessandro Michele did this thing with Gucci Ghost, who was a creative person that he discovered on Instagram, and Michele also did this thing with Unskilled Worker, who also discovered on Instagram. So there is this new interesting way of telling stories digitally, where you can connect with someone that you never would have met with before.
Exactly.
And it provides a whole new kind of, I feel in a way, there's more authenticity to those kinds of stories, because they haven't been dreamed up in some corporate boardroom saying, well, what's the campaign for the season?
It's
to Geoffroy's point, it feels like some of these things can feel more real.
It's more of an organic connection, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, authenticity is definitely the way forward.
Yeah.
Because it's been manufactured, fabricated for so long. I think it's good, to bring something real.
Yeah.
And that didn't come from an article, the outcome of it. It was because it was an interesting picture, and he made me happy.
Yeah. And you can respond to that, which I think is this idea of like the designer cloistered off in an ivory tower, locked away from the world, sending out, direction to the world about how the world should look or how someone should act. I think right now we're living in a world that lives in a conversational story where you're in dialogue with your fans. Geoffroy, Susie, Sebastian, Sandra, you're all very busy people, so thanks for taking the time. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.